then, Vetus, long before the pandemic hit, an alarming number of young people were struggling with their mental health. But according to some in the health industry, the disruptions caused by COVID made things even worse.
And for many high school-aged kids, it's ushered in a historic spike in depression and anxiety. We've been reporting on a crisis in our local classrooms all day long, and as part of that series, CBS 12's Jay O'Brien sat down with 3 local teens who opened up about how they and their friends have been struggling to get through the past 2 years, just as the U.S. Surgeon General is warning of a mental health crisis in kids nationwide. Jay?
Yeah, guys, good evening. That is exactly right. That's what's playing out nationwide. One of the reasons it's been truly hard to track this crisis is because mental health is just so hard to talk about, particularly for teenagers. But we found 3 brave kids willing to tell us what it's been like these past few years, living a childhood unlike any other in modern American history. Are you hearing from your friends those feelings of depression and anxiety?
Yeah. Yes.
Wandy Nascent, Cherish Kuntz, and Terry Wolf are all high schoolers in West Palm Beach. They tell me they're still grappling with how remote learning and social isolation upended their lives 2 years ago.
That was my worst school year possible because, being online made it so I was just completely lazy. If this pandemic had never happened, I think, I would have stopped being so antisocial when I'm at school. I think that's what messed me up when the pandemic hit.
Sheila Jo Gaines and Pastor Ray Whiteley with the local nonprofit Trinity Counseling Centers have been hearing these stories from teens for a while now, and they can only guess what the long-term impact of this experience is going to be.
They had life figured out prior to COVID. COVID happened. So many changes happened. Now they're trying to figure out how they fit in.
At the Youth Empowerment Center in West Palm Beach, Sheila and Pastor Whiteley encourage kids to open up in weekly discussions.
We talked about facing our fears.
Terry, Wandy, and Cherish lead some of those conversations where the impact of separation and seclusion is on full display.
A lot of the kids are lost and searching for their emotions and their feelings.
And the same thing is playing out across the country. This advisory from the U.S. Surgeon General out this past December details an ongoing mental health crisis in kids, with rates of depression and anxiety having doubled during the pandemic. Suicide attempts, particularly for teenage girls, increased by more than 50%. There's also fresh trauma from COVID deaths of family and friends, not to mention the stress and worry about the virus itself.
It's nerve-wracking for me. Just casual things in general, I can't really do now thanks to the fear of COVID.
You never got to start a normal high school.
Yeah, I never did.
When the daily routine and stability of school suddenly disappeared from their lives in March of 2020, it didn't just interrupt these teens' education. Their whole lives were turned upside down. Friends, they say, were absent, and remote learning was complicated by technical failures, particularly from school district laptops that kept crashing.
The computers they gave us, it wasn't really that good, so it will always keep disconnecting on and off. I just stopped caring and let my grades slip around mid-school year.
Is that still impacting you now?
It's still impacting me now because I'm still not used to the fatigue of actually going to school.
So I think a lot of parents were figuring, okay, well, the kids are back in school, everything will be great, and they're seeing that, the kids aren't adjusting as well as they thought.
Child psychologist Dr. Jassett Smith is still treating kids struggling to cope with the consequences of COVID. She warns the problem could only get worse if not handled the right way.
If they're being told, get over it, push through it, this is not a problem, nothing to see here, then they do feel more isolated than ever. So not only physically, isolated, but emotionally isolated.
Florida's students have been back in school longer than most, but even here, the damage from the pandemic is still close to the surface. For Cherish, a senior hoping to head off to college, she and her friends are concerned COVID has done irreversible harm, cutting them off from a normal future.
We'll get together and talk, and I ask them what y'all want to do when y'all graduate, and they were it's not really much to do because of the pandemic.
In spite of their worries, these teens are still full of hope. Terry, the youngest, discovered graphic design while stuck at home and a new sense of purpose.
During like COVID, it took till I'd say about 5 months ago before I even started getting inspiration to actually do something with my life.
So you feel like you've won in all this?
Like a bunch of roadblocks, but I still kind of made it through.
As you heard, these students are optimistic, but some of the educators that we've been speaking with are concerned that this generation may be feeling the impacts of the pandemic for years to come. One mental health professional told us that supporting kids who may have felt cut off from the world during COVID is crucial now more than ever. And that means improving access to mental health resources, some of which are still hard to come by for families or hard to find.
California is the first state to reveal its endemic plan. The word endemic doesn't really mean much to most people, but it marks a big shift in the COVID strategy. CBS 12's Andrew Lofholm is live now in West Palm Beach with what it means for us here in Florida. Andrew?
Florida's been in this endemic phase, you could argue, for a while now. No lockdowns, no strict masking rules. In fact, during the Omicron wave, hospitals were still able to treat the COVID patients and the non-COVID patients. So in the big picture, here's what we can expect moving forward. March will be 3 years since the United States has been living in a pandemic, the novel coronavirus locking down the country as the government and healthcare providers scramble to figure out how to get a handle on the disease. It's been a series of waves. At its worst, hospitals and funeral homes at capacity. But now, nearly 3 years later, COVID appears to be around for the long haul. It will be a part of whatever the new normal settles into. Dr. Klepperde Almeida is an infectious disease specialist at the JFK Medical Center.
Pandemic is beginning to go away. It's becoming endemic. So that phase of novelty has disappeared.
Healthcare workers now clearly know what works. Masks, monoclonals, COVID pills, and most important of all, the vaccine. All were questions 3 years ago. These are the latest COVID numbers here in Florida. We're at the tail end of the Omicron wave. So this is the last week right here, around 42,000 new cases. Look at where we were at beginning of the year, peaking at 427,000 cases. Jump down here, same time frame. The positivity rate of the people taking COVID tests, how many are actually coming back positive, that number was right around 30%. Right now, about 8.2%. The goal is for that number to be under 5%. But here's the key takeaway with Omicron. Hospitals were able to manage that caseload much better than they were able to with Delta. Is there a possibility that we could have another Delta-like wave come back that turns out to be really infectious and severe at the same time?
Yes, there is a possibility. It seems less likely, but definitely possible.
Even with that possibility, this break in cases lets hospitals reload to prepare with all the advancements made against COVID. Fighting COVID could also lead to some unintended benefits. What do you look at the future of masks?
We've noticed that as we wore masks, the number of influenza cases decreased tremendously. I think that come the winter season, folks in hospitals are going to be wearing masks.
They could stick around in hospital settings as COVID digs in.
We've, to some extent, accepted that we're going to be living with COVID for the foreseeable future and probably for our lifetimes.
Now, I also asked about additional COVID shots, that fourth booster, and maybe more shots after that. But right now, the data shows that 3 is enough, unless, of course, you're immunocompromised. But, of course, they're going to keep looking at that data from the United States and Israel is what Dr. De Almeida said. Looking at that data, depending on what that says, it could indicate that we might need another shot. But, again, right now we're told that we are good with 3 shots.